have you here. I'm going to start by thanking HCAM, as we used to call them, and Harbor Media, which is the new name, for filming us this evening. I think it gives people at home a chance to see how we operate and what we do. And thank you for being with us. Remind our committee and all of you, if you get up to the mic, to please sort of speak into it, not like this, but just in a general direction, and they'll pick it up. And if they don't pick it up, they'll let us know it's not coming. We just need to pass our minutes first, and then we'll get on with our meeting. Everyone got a chance to read them. They went out well in advance. Thank you, Carol, for a wonderful job, as always. I'll entertain a motion to accept them as written.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of October 18th, 2017.
Thanks, Vicki. Seconded?
Second.
Okay. Anyone want to discuss them at all? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you very much. We will not be discussing finances at tonight's meeting. We have a lot to cover, but we just wanted to let all of you who are here to propose projects that, as usual, we have well over twice the amount of requests as we have funding. And as you recall, because of the last few years, we've taken on debt payments up to the tune of almost $500,000 per year. And so whatever we get from the state and from our own taxes, we immediately take off a big chunk right at the beginning. So it means that you need to make your presentation mean something to the town. Let us know how this will affect the town and in what way people will benefit from seeing what you'd like to do. Okay, and again, when you get up to speak, please get right into the microphone and tell us who you are, and it is being recorded. We are going to start with, before we get to our 4 proponents for tonight, we're going to have a quick discussion about a project that was passed at the annual town meeting of 2015. It was a lovely little gazebo, which was going to be rebuilt on Ragged Island. And Jim Conroy, who is our vice chairman, is going to take us through that process.
I just want to set the stage briefly for Andrea, who will talk about the substance of this, but procedurally, I guess. We had, before my time on the committee endorsed $5,000 for the restoration and erection of this gazebo on Ragged Island, being a relic of the Melville Gardens. And also before my time, there were some delays and other things, and this committee extended the deadline for that through the end of this year. We found a month or two ago on the Historical Commission that the cost of moving the materials and the labor and all that out to the island, clearing the island, was going to make it, was going to exceed the budget by a significant number. So sort of a subcommittee of the Historical Commission started looking into other alternatives that might work instead, land-bound alternatives, and came up with a few possibilities, the upshot of which is the possibility of putting it up in part of the old Melville Gardens territory, if you will, on what's called the Grove at the end of the waterfront area. And there's a couple of complications involved in that Andrea can briefly tell you about, but one of them is that assuming we did that and this committee approved that, we'd have to probably go back to the town meeting and get another, hopefully a checkoff on this, because the town meeting warrant article says it will be erected on Ragged Island, and if it were erected anywhere else, we'd have to get their blessing. So with that preamble.
Hi, I'm Andrea Young, and my address, I live at 18 Back River Road in Hingham, but a lot of the time I live here down the hall in the Historical Commission. As Jim said, it looks like I brought my pillow tonight. But anyway, I am here, Jim set the stage for me to talk to you about the gazebo, and we are respectfully asking for you to allow us to continue to work on this project with the sum that was originally appropriated. I think the reasons for, there are many reasons for why this project hasn't come to fruition yet. Chief among them is that the gentleman our commission member who first proposed this, moved to Florida. And he was the one who had the relationship with the National Park Service and the Boston Harbor Islands. And so once he left, their interest, I think, dwindled. They were supposed to provide us with not only volunteer help, but also technical support. And if you have not been out to Ragged Island, it's the spot that we had chosen would have been very visible from Hingham Harbor, and that was basically the idea. However, it's very rocky, and so being able to to build a gazebo there and stabilize it against the wind and all the other elements was challenging, to say the least. Couldn't do it for the amount of money that we had. So, and what I'm going to pass out to you is just a copy of the original proposal, because I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this was originally proposed as a reconstruction. This was not. Because what we have left of the gazebo is basically the top.
Thank you.
And it is about 5 feet or so in diameter. I'm also going to pass around pictures of the gazebo itself so that you can see what it looks like. This was in someone's backyard on Elm Street on a brick foundation, and it's got seats on it. It's very charming. These are pictures of the gazebo itself in the backyard. It was moved there intact, and it was doing fine until and someone new purchased it, and they wanted to get rid of the garage, build a new garage, put on an addition, and so the contractor got a little too aggressive, and the gazebo basically was smashed to smithereens, with the exception of the roof. So that's what we have. So here are the pictures, and on the back you will see a drawing of the original gazebo. So anyway, as Jim mentioned, Signe McCullough, one of our commission members, went to Harbor Development and asked them, we had written a letter prior to that explaining that we would really appreciate it if they would allow us to, if they could find a place for it, we'd love to have them do that. So we're still working out the details, but with the trustees of the Bathing Beach and the Harbor Development Committee, but they've been very supportive. They'll take it, and we'd like to reconstruct it. And just so that, the other thing I wanted to mention is that according to the Secretary of the Interior standards, there are various forms of preservation. One is preservation itself. Another is restoration. And another one is reconstruction. So when you know exactly what the original piece looks like, that is acceptable to do. And we do have some historic fabric left. So that's the story. And so we're respectfully asking for you to allow us to continue with this project, and also to support us with a warrant article changing the location to Hingham Harbor from Ragged Island.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
I'll start it off. your proposal from last year, from 15, says gazebo requires significant reconstruction, but the warrant article uses different wording, and I'm wondering if that was a slip-up on the part of producing the warrant
I
article.
can't answer that. Unfortunately, it was, I think sometimes what happens is that people use words interchangeably. So we have, restore, refurbish, rehabilitate, and reconstruction is, so for somebody who's not used to the terms, I think that probably is the reason why that happened.
Yeah, that's too bad. We have to sort of stick by what the town voted on.
Yes.
So that's why if you move it to another location, you have to go back in the warrant article.
Understood.
But where we CPC get in trouble is it called for the preservation of an historic gazebo. And if all that's left is the roof and a whole new gazebo, whether it imitates the old one, we can't build reproductions with CPC money, or if it's constructing a new, different look, we can't use CPC money to construct a new one.
Understood.
So can we find out, is there anything left besides the roof? Are there any doodads? I know it's a very fancy looking, lots of gingerbread and so forth. Anything usable?
No, this is purely a reconstruction project, using the historic fabric that we have and knowing precisely what it looked like, dimensions and all. This is, and as I said, this is acceptable under the Secretary of the Interior standards, and I would hope that we would be able to, technically, I suppose, we're preserving the top, because what do we do with it?
Yeah.
What do we do with it if we can't reconstruct it? So that's
Yeah.
just the question.
At what point did it become clear that this was just powder, dust? Because at one point it says in the 2015 town warrant that it's being currently stored in a warehouse. So somebody moved it from Elm Street into a building somewhere, some warehouse.
Yes, the DPW
Was it
has it.
still sort of together at that
No.
point? It was already disintegrated?
Everything was in the dumpster.
Oh, man.
Everything was, one day it was fine, and I got, the way we found out was that I got a call from the neighbor, who was very upset. So here's what we have left then. We have this marvelous roof. We can reconstruct it precisely. So, which is, as I said, I'm sorry to reiterate, but it is a form of preserving what's left of the gazebo. Because if,
May I comment?
What's that?
I think that before reconstruction, when you have the whole original roof, which defines the form of the rest of it, isn't just making something from scratch totally new. It'll be a third original and two-thirds or less new, the posts and the bench. So, I mean, it may fall into that category of reconstruction, but it's partly restoration of the part you have, in case that makes a difference.
that's how I hope that you will see this.
At some point, I think it was when Signe was making her discussion in front of the Harbor Development Committee, she had a picture of what it looked like, and it looked just like what you'd think of, sort of Victorian-looking, very ornate, with
This
bench
is
and
not
so forth.
very ornate.
This is modern.
It's
Yeah.
very simple, and on the other side of that, you can see the rendering from Melville Gardens.
But that photo, Andrea, is of the gazebo before it was trashed?
That's right.
That's what it looked like.
That's exactly what it looked like. It's a very simple structure.
Are you saying this is what it looked like?
Yeah,
This is
that's
before
it.
the
Oh,
record,
well,
right?
she had a picture she held up, it was very Victorian-looking and very...
I think that probably was another example of, but if you looked at Peter Bickford's drawing, it's a construction drawing, and it is, this is it.
And I would note, too, that I bet, of the USS Constitution, to take an example?
I was on the board, watch what you say.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, I would be surprised if there's more than 10% of the original
Over
wood on
many,
that.
many years, yeah, you're right.
So that's, the nature of this stuff.
What is your timing now? We have so much going on tonight. Can we take this to our next meeting and have a
Absolutely.
discussion about it and
Yes,
vote on it and so
absolutely.
forth?
And I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Roger, do you want to make any? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. I'm taking it all in. No, I think it's merely a judgment call at this point, I think. I think it's important to get the new article in, because the location, you've already touched upon that. Not much more to add.
I did speak with town council about that point as
Good.
well.
Yeah.
And lawyer to lawyer, we talked it through and
Yeah.
figured out that there shouldn't be any reason why we can't recast the language and bring it to the
Absolutely.
next meeting.
I agree.
And so we talk about revisiting it at the next meeting. You don't mean tomorrow night, you mean?
Yeah, no, the next real
Next one.
meeting.
Okay,
One of our
fine.
real meetings.
Yeah.
That's December 3rd. I mean, December 13th.
And just I guess one question would be, is the estimate still the same? Are we comfortable with the dollar amount?
The estimate that was originally in
Yeah.
here, no, it was more than that. So,
I want to come to the mic.
So the answer is no. The estimate that was in here really wouldn't do the job properly. So we have, Peter Bickford has agreed to build it, and pretty much at cost. So, but not having to schlep it over to the island is huge in terms of saving money. And just the difficulty of anchoring it to the rock.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone all right with that? We postpone it till our meeting, and anybody else?
Can you pass that around?
Oh, here. Okay, so we'll start with the 4 projects tonight. There are 9 remaining. As you know, we usually get about 20 every year, and they self-withdraw for various reasons. Some don't get permission to use the land or the house that they want to use, or they're not quite ready to get their final application in, or for one reason or another, some have withdrawn. So we're down to 9 now, and rather than have us sit here till midnight, we've broken it into 4 tonight, 5 tomorrow night. You're welcome to come to both, and we'll start with conservation of historic town documents. Andrea.
And I'm back, and this is going to be more interesting because I have something to show and tell. So, again, I'm Andrea Young, and I am the administrator for the Historical and Historic Districts Commissions, and I'm here on behalf of the Historical Commission, who is proposing, and the town clerk, who is proposing this project. Here is a list of what we've got that we'll be working on this year.
Can we pass those off by him?
Is it the same as in the proposal?
Yeah, it is. So what I brought with me tonight, I brought several volumes. But first, let me, and I won't bore you with all of them, but one nice one will do. Our records, which are stored in the town clerk's office, are from the 1600s and later. And we're very fortunate to have those. And you always wonder, where were they all this time? So they have been damaged over time, not just due to age, but also due to the fact that, who knows, they were stored in somebody's cupboard or whatever. But anyway, we have them. We have a lot of them, so that's wonderful. So this list represents what we would like to work on this year. The gentleman who is doing the work for us has done work for us in the past. He's quite he's excellent, and he's also very reasonable. And he has done work for the GAR Hall and also our maps here in Town Hall. And last year he came in under budget slightly. So, but what he's basically doing is taking each of these volumes, and he has triaged them so that the worst ones are getting done first, or the ones in the poorest condition. And he is, in some cases, fixing the binding, and in other cases, as you'll see when I show it to you, some of the pages are ripped. We also found an interesting thing, that is the early ink, which is the iron gall ink, has survived very nicely. It has come through the other sides of the paper, but yet it is quite legible. In probably the next century, they started using another type of ink, and it was probably cheaper. And it was India ink, I think. And so there's quite a difference in the fade factor. So all these volumes are currently, they're in archival boxes, and they are protected, so that the work that is being done on them now makes them available to other people, to researchers, to anybody who wants to take a look at them, and they are very interesting. So if you don't mind, let me just get one volume. And this is not my pillow. This is
Sleeping bag.
yeah, sleeping bag. This actually prevents the books from opening too far. So, all right, what we have here is the records of bargains and sales from 1635 to 1650. So, and this one, the binding isn't in as terrible a shape, but you can see that most of ours are like this. There's quite a separation. So anyway, this particular volume names all the first settlers. And as you can see, the writing is spectacular. So whatever happened to penmanship, right? Anyway, but let me just show you. There's a great deal of information in all of these books that it's a real treasure for anybody who's doing research.
So can I ask a question? There's no question how valuable all of this information is. So help us understand restoration. Are we talking about restoring, preserving the documents as well as digitizing them, or what?
Digitizing, I wish we.
Okay, so that's not
asking
yet.
for more money,
Okay.
but I think
So-
some of these have been
Microfilm, right.
Microfilm in
right.
the 60s.
Right, okay. So when you say preserving, so just so I understand, is it something that we can still see the book? Is it something that how would you, I don't understand what that means, so just help us understand what you're talking about, because I'm totally for it.
Each of the volumes will have various treatments. It depends on the condition of the volume.
Right.
So the treatment could include, the treatment could include repairing the leather. It could also include solidifying the binding, so that in some cases it may be re-gluing. In some cases it requires some additional help, like tape. The pages that are ripped can be strengthened with rice paper.
Right, okay.
And so the idea basically is, and then some of these things, you need to separate the pages because they've, with mildew and they've stuck together.
Got it, right.
So all of that will take place, and so that will make these volumes accessible to people who'd like to use them.
Right, but not for everyday use. I mean, they'd still be,
They'd
very fragile.
Yes, and they
They're
would be
preserved, but still fragile. They're not open.
That's right, Vicki. They would be still housed in the town clerk's office, and they would be, people can go in and request them, and then you get to go through them very carefully. No white gloves, though,
No, thank you.
because the white gloves have a tendency to break. I mean, this is so thin, and it catches, yeah, so.
What did you say, a tendency to what?
Oh, the white gloves, used to be that you should take these documents and handle them with gloves so that you don't put the oils from your fingers on it. But there are other methods now, which include just instruments, very thin instruments that you can use to move the pages.
It's quite amazing.
Any questions?
Thank you.
So this year you're doing 10. This has been a series you've
Yes.
done over the
Yes.
years. I assume it's based on what needs it the most urgently.
That's right.
Okay.
That-
And your request is only a little over 3,000. That's not very much.
No.
Are you going at the speed that works best for you and Mr. Harperoff or Harbaugh?
He could certainly do more. Last year, I think we requested $6,000, and
much
so
more.
what this also includes, by the way, is before and after pictures, which I sent to Carol, and
Is he open to doing more?
oh yeah,
This year?
he would be. He would be.
Time is important, health and fragility and everything.
Yeah.
We're hinting at you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure he would be delighted to, and so would Eileen.
I mean, are there 100 more you want to do, or 10 more, or?
It's hard to say. I would say probably there are at least 20 or 30 more volumes.
Okay.
We started with the earliest ones. So,
Can you say the total again, 30 volumes plus the ones that have been done altogether?
no, that would still need to be done. We have there probably about 30 or 40 more. And so this year, we're just asking for some $3,000.
This is a quarter of all, or, I'm just trying to get a sense of how much to do the whole thing.
He would have to look, it really depends on the condition. What he does is a condition assessment, and then he makes bases his estimate on that.
But at some point, if you just said, we're going to go for it, get them all done, you'd hit up against his schedule, his ability to
Although
put them
he's-
all in, and,
Well, actually, he's semi-retired, so he's got more time than he did previously. So. But we would welcome that if the commission is so inclined to, committee, allow us to do that.
Thanks.
How many volumes have you done to date?
12, I think.
Is it 12? I just want,
12, and this represents another 10.
okay.
So
And there's 30 more, or 30?
I would say 30 or 40.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the Old Ordinary Master Site Plan and Restoration. Alexandra Rollins, welcome you to your first meeting in front of CPC.
I know, thank you. I was late because I got lost.
It happens.
I know. Big idiot about it.
So I'm Alexandra Rollins, and I live in Jamaica Plain, 24 Goodrich Road. I am the executive director of the Hingham Historical Society, which includes a number of properties. And tonight, I'm going to talk to you about the Old Ordinary property, which is at 21 Lincoln Street in the middle of town. I did a quick PowerPoint for you to summarize what it is that we're interested in doing. The Old Ordinary, you may all know, is composed of about 5 different pieces. There's the Old Ordinary itself, which is 1688, the Fort Building, 1685, the Annex, which is 1901, the Olmsted Garden, which is 1906, and then the land itself. The Fort Building, well, I'll go through these. The proposal is to examine the grounds through current archaeological methods and technologies to develop a master plan for the site and to build a foundation for, and install the fort building. You all may know that the fort building is something that was moved to that site, and the Historic Commission also is owner in that Richardson property. We own a lot of documents as well from the Richardson collection in league with them. The goals of the project are to preserve the fort building from further decay. When it was moved, it was put onto concrete blocks, and we have been watching it and sticking our heads underneath the foundation and so forth. A lot of you saw it when you came and did the site visit. But basically, the building it's decaying where it's sitting, and it doesn't have enough support consistently underneath it. So I am concerned, we are concerned, that it doesn't have adequate help at this point. So that's our primary goal. The second is to establish what part of the property is best suited to house the fort building permanently. And in order to do that, that will be the archaeological component. And then to determine the best use of the pieces of the property from the perspective of the Historical Society, the community, and the town of Hingham, generally speaking. We feel really strongly about saving the building, preserving the building, and to a lesser degree, but because we're preservationists and historians, we would like to have it available for people to study and to go into, but in the raw. That is, we wouldn't remove material that had been applied afterwards, except we may do some tweaks, like the windows, things like that, down the line. But essentially, to open it in the raw so that people can study architecture and study how people built and how people used tools and what they thought of and all the rest of it back in the 1680s. That's our primary goal. We want to establish areas that are rich in promise for archaeological investigation, further archaeological restoration. That could be a privy pit or the evidence of another structure on the property. And we do know there were other structures, and there have to have been privy pits. And then at the same time, establish areas that are not rich in any sort of evidence, which would allow us to work with the property in creative ways, including something like, for me, I would love to see an herb garden, you know, something that the old order would have had that would be medicinal and herbs used for cuisine and things like that. Another benefit is to allow the restoration, conservation, and programming of all three buildings and the gardens. We don't feel as though we can do that for the long run right now. It's short programs. It's for this year. You know, maybe next year something will change and we'll have to adjust. So we want to have a bigger plan, and that will provide the groundwork for grant applications that we need to write for conserving the old ordinary itself, which it does need considerable work. The annex, which has, it is 1901, but it has real significance, and it's a great building, and it could be extremely useful to the community. It already has been extremely useful to a lot of different groups, and we want to get grant money for that, and then, of course, for the old fort building, programming the old fort building, and so on. You see the proposed costs, and I'm not going to repeat those because everybody's eyes pop open, but that's what the proposal is. Do you have questions, concerns, issues?
There was a piece in here for repairing some damages to the old ordinary itself?
No, there's nothing for doing that. It is only, we have many of the granite blocks upon which it sat previously. We will have to acquire additional granite blocks, and we will have to do some engineering and some ground preparation and stuff like that. But essentially, it's simply to move it and put it, stabilize
Courthouse,
it,
yeah.
and put it onto a permanent
Nice.
foundation.
I thought they had saved all the capstones, no? They don't? not enough?
I gather because it was attached to another building,
Oh,
that,
that's right, you're missing a wall.
Yeah.
That's what it is, yeah. Yeah. Many of us followed that building down through town.
I know, I saw wonderful
Lifted the wires up
photos.
to go underneath. and all
Yeah.
that, and-
Great fun.
Hi, Alexandra.
How are you, Larry?
So my questions aren't about the worthiness of the project. They're about money, which
Yeah.
there's never enough of.
Right.
So one thing I think it's important to point out is that the town is still on the hook for
Right.
just about half of the 1.1 million that the townspeople voted for at town meeting to go to the rehabilitation of Old Derby. I think we're at 547 that we still owe. And I'm looking at your sources of funding for this 100,000, and it mentions Mass Historical Commission and Massachusetts Cultural Council and private funding, and it doesn't mention Greenbush, which is another possibility, because I think you're in
It
the
is,
Greenbush
yeah.
corridor. So
Yeah.
I was just,
I'm getting more familiar with Greenbush. I did get some for the, to stabilize the water leakage in Old Ordinary this spring.
so I was wondering, for instance, both Mass Historical and Massachusetts Cultural Council, they have money to perform, they have grants specifically to help do this kind of upfront work. And it seems to me that there's funds from a variety of sources that could be gone after, but the application isn't showing that you're seeking money from any source other than CPC.
Right, because this is the first phase of a phased project. So the bulk of the project that is going to cost the majority of however many funds we end up spending is the conservation and restoration of these buildings. It is not in the archaeology, which is pretty cheap in the scheme of things. And it's not in putting the building on its pins, or on the master plan for that matter. But I want to be able to go to those entities and not have them say, well, you just got money from us for this. I did get money from them for another project last year, so I know them and I have a good rapport with them, all these different agencies, state agencies. But it's just, I want to ask for more money from them. I want to ask for, instead of sort of picking away at Old Ordinary, I want to look at it as a whole and make sure that it is stabilized as a whole.
I understand your strategy, and we have no rules binding us, although it's a rule of thumb that when a private entity comes before CPC for a project or a portion of the
Yeah.
project, that they try to get something like 2/3 of the money or some of the money from somewhere else, so that
Harold told me that. I
CPC sort of
didn't know
doesn't
that.
become a slush fund.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Because that is not the case in Quincy, where I went to the CPC and they said, well, you're not asking enough money here, you should have 2.5 times what you just asked for. But there are many sources of funds for archaeological work and for educational work. The work that is proposed in this proposal by PAL is the survey portion of it. If we end up digging, because we have found something, that will be a very different matter. And that will be something where we have to go and get grants and work with UMass Boston or Wellesley or whoever does the work on it. So, and I know there are little sources and there are big sources of money for that sort of thing. So that would be sort of the tip of it. It's only to get an overview of what there might be and where we have to be careful. Does that explain it?
Vague about the original location of the fort. Was that where the Richardson property is, or did that get moved to that property and now get moved back?
I wish you wouldn't ask me
I
that
can answer
question.
that.
You can answer that?
I don't know
There were
the
3
answer.
forts in town, and one, you can see the foundation of it up in the graveyard, the old burial ground.
Right.
But this was the only fort building that was still remaining. There was one that they're not sure exactly where it was located, out closer up on Otis Hill, and then this one was up on Old Fort Street. And if you go by the cemetery, you can see where the obvious mound is, and that's where it was. At some point, it was rolled down on, they think on logs, down to the corner of, what is that development in there now that just bought it out?
Conservatory Park.
Yeah. And it sat there for many years, and when John Richardson, there were many owners along the way. When John got it, he really turned it back into a fort almost. He had so much wonderful stuff in there. But when he died and it was going to go on the market, and then with Andrea's help and everybody, the Historical Society bought it.
Okay.
Didn't buy it, but we own it now, and people gave their services for free and put it on a flatbed and lifted up the wires and got it down to where it is. It's been moved slightly from its original drop-off point. It looks a little different than what I remember seeing before. It's over slightly. And they saved the capstones because they knew they wanted, if not a foundation, they just want to put it on the capstones again.
But it was never on the old ordinary property originally?
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
And then the second question is it in any physical jeopardy right now up on those cinder blocks? Is that
It seems,
risk?
if you look under it, it seems as though there's some wet rot underneath it because it's exposed to the weather. It's about this high up, maybe. So there's a lot of exposure to the weather. But you know, if you have piles of cinder blocks like this, and so eventually you're going to get this sagging
Yeah.
in between.
like a bookshelf?
Yeah.
Now, because of our limited finances and vast numbers of requests, we're going to ask everybody the same question, except Andrea, who doesn't ask for enough money as it is, so we let her off the hook. If you don't get it this year, is there another way you'll continue with the project in spite of that, or will you just wait and come back next year?
There are ways that I'd cobble it together, but I probably would not have to talk to my board.
Yeah.
You know, we have a lot of needs.
Yeah.
This was just such a clear need to me. And I am worried about the fort. And, you know, if we could just put it on a proper foundation, put it down, we'd do that.
Well, that
We
is
can't.
my next question then. What if you just did an archaeological dig where you'd sort of like to put it anyway? and
Well, we
get it
don't know
down?
where that would be.
Oh, okay.
Because the master plan will help us figure out if we, for instance, if we have it behind Old Ordinary, then the docents could take people through. They could watch the old fort and guard it while they were guarding Old Ordinary. It could be an L. It could be an entrance on the other side.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with, I asked a neighbor how he'd feel about it being just connected with a breezeway. He said, oh, no.
Yeah.
You know, it depends on what the community says and what the community's needs are.
So there's no real way to break your request into a component, do 1 year and the next year? If we
Well,
gave you half the money,
what I
is what I'm
could
saying, what
do
would you-
is, I could do it that way, but I'd have to wait till the end of however many years it took to get
the money
the
was due.
components done, and then go back and
Yeah.
figure it out. Which is, I mean,
You couldn't just start and do the...
It's been around since
Big.
1685. I'm sure it'll
Going anywhere.
last another year. But this is the issue with these old buildings, is people say, oh, well, we'll just put it here temporarily. And it's been there temporarily for a very long time.
Committee, what do you think? No questions?
I just wanted to say, just in terms of process, we had the opportunity to talk, and typically, we'd like to see 3 construction estimates, or an attempt to make 3 construction estimates, and a lot of that has to do with...
Right, I know. I'm
public
sorry,
funds.
Roger, I know.
I know it's a hassle, and, but...
No, it's not that.
It's just one of those things where we, again, we try to make, provide some assurance to the community that, we're getting the best value, and truthfully, the other is just a matter of appearance, right? We want to make sure the proponents come forward.
Yeah.
And their brother-in-law is not getting the work, or the cousins, and I'm
Yeah,
not
oh,
suggesting,
yeah.
of course, that that's
Oh,
happening.
absolutely.
But
I
a
get
lot
it,
of what we deal
totally.
with is appearance.
And I did make
But-
calls after I
Yeah.
talked to you about the 3 bids, and essentially, it just kept kind of getting pushed back to,
Sure.
well, who moved it there?
Yeah.
Who knows the building? Who is the expert in this unique
Right.
thing? Because you can't just treat it the way you would any other building,
Well, I think
or
in the-
even when it was 100 years old.
Yeah, I think in the past, the committee, this one and prior committees, have recognized that there are times when there are specialty things that need to take place. For example, you have an archaeologist.
Yeah.
I'm sure you just don't go anywhere and find an archaeologist who understands this type of work, so you have an estimate, single estimate from an archaeologist. I think,
Yeah.
certainly not speaking for the committee, but they would probably be receptive to saying, okay, you've got one quote for that, but we get it, they're not archaeologists running all over the place.
Right.
But if there's specialty, even from a construction standpoint, and you can demonstrate that there was an attempt made, or we called, he's not interested, something along the line, so that at least we can respond to the public in a way that's responsible in terms of
That's
getting those
a good idea,
quotes.
Yeah, yeah, I did talk to 3 other contractors about it.
Yeah.
But it just kept coming back to, well, if Ben is the restoration architect, and he moved it there, and he worked with these other 2 people putting it on the concrete, then
We love
really, he knows it best. And
We love Ben. I've known Ben for many years, so Ben's great. But we could, if you've contacted
I
2
get
other
you.
people, and you can say, here, we tried, this is the person I just like to be able to report to you guys and say, hey, there was an attempt to try to get some other quotes.
Sure, yep.
Just add one thing, there are other archaeologists, believe it
Yeah,
or not. So
Most
it might be
people-
worth it to, and since that's the major chunk of your bid, it might be worth it to get a couple of more quotes.
I went to them because they worked with the town before, and they worked at Ordinary before. And they did that little corner by the tool room, that little corner they did.
Yeah.
And so they're familiar with the site and the sort of materials that come out of it, and with the town and its regs. And that's what I was recommended to do, is just, if that's their specialty and they've been there, done that. They also, I believe, did Old Derby for the HSR.
Some people have wondered if it would be possible someday for you to take overnight guests so the inn serves as an inn.
You asked that, yeah.
Some people, many of them. And I'm just wondering, are there things that could be looked at just to identify what should or
Like a
shouldn't be
tent
done?
camp or something outside? A tent.
Sleep
a
in little
tent.
beds.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it'd be great to come to Hingham and say, I went to Hingham and I stayed at the Old Ordinary, and I got scalped by the Indians, or something, make
Yeah.
it really real. But, the building has to be preserved, but so many people visit it on tours.
They do.
That it's used to people walking through, and a couple of people sleeping would be...
It's very fragile, though.
Should we tell them the beds are stuffed with that styrofoam plastic popcorn stuff?
Really?
You wouldn't want to sleep on those beds.
Okay, I'll have to bring some hay.
To bring in a cot or something.
Anyway, that's not what you're looking at right now, but it'd be interesting if you could identify things that might be needed for that, or might be included in the future.
An income generation tool, yeah.
On a B&B.
You have to give out free nightcaps with little frilly things.
And as part of that, the old the cavern is small, but have you been to the building in Avon that's like this?
Yeah.
Okay, where they have the tavern is bigger, but they do historically more or less appropriate music and drinking, and it's revenue for the organization.
Yeah.
Get on that, would you? Okay, thank you very much. Nice
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Oh, next we have the Memorial Bell Tower, bell repair, and who's representing us tonight?
Hi, I'm Martha Ryan. I live at 16 Brewster Road in Hingham. I've been a ringer for about 10 years and been on the Hingham Memorial Bell Tower Committee for, I lost count, but it's been maybe 5 years or so, and I've brought Dan.
I'm Daniel Cushing. I live in Boston, and my relationship to the tower is that I've been teaching bell ringing there for quite a few years, every Saturday morning, actually, at 9:30. So.
And you told me you are somehow related to all the other Cushings in Hingham, including the one
I
that built
am,
my house.
absolutely, yes. Yes, I could bore you to tears, but but yes, we go way back.
Okay, do you need the lights off for this?
You all see?
So the bell tower, I think everybody knows a little bit about the bell tower, but the bells were cast in 1911. The tower was dedicated in 1912. Mike, you can have you. Sorry. It was dedicated in 1912 to the settlers of Hingham, and it was dedicated as a living speaking memorial to the first settlers of Hingham. And I think that's really important because we have the tower, which is the structure, and many people have been to the tower, but if you haven't been to the tower, probably the bells have come and found you because it is a speaking memorial. And most of our residents have heard the bells ring through the town. Each of the bells are inscribed with their own inscriptions, and I just listed them here and there in your handout because I think they're really remarkable. And the bells, although they're hidden away, are just kind of miraculous. If you've never been up to the belfry, if you have an opportunity to do so, there's our fearless leader, Mike Schillen, next to one of the smaller bells. So the smallest bell is 550 pounds, but it goes up to over a ton, 262 pounds, and they're just really awesome the way they are up there. So. So I just wanted to tell a little introduction. Oh, it's like karaoke. In terms of where you might have heard the bells, we ring for holidays and events. You've probably heard us for 4th of July. We ring. We are asked to ring for wedding celebrations. We rang for family reunions. We ring once a week, just as a band, as we try and learn our methods. We toll for funerals. So we mark all those important events in our lives in the town, and that is one of the ways where you would have heard our bells. The other way is that we are often a stop on the international bell ringing tours. So usually we're fortunate at least once a year to have a band come from England and ring a half peal or a full peal of bells, which can take up to 3 hours if they do a full peal. That's amazing. These are people who have been ringing their whole lives and are really, really good at it. We're practicing. It's been 10 years for me. We're still working on it. So that's really exciting. We also have people who just come into the tower every week when we're there. You know, if the door's open, they come up, they're interested to know what's going on, and they come up and they watch us ring, and once the bells are down, we can give them a tour of the belfry, and that happens quite frequently. One of the things I wanted to just note, because I think it's a common misconception for people who come up into the bell tower, is that unlike, say, the bell in the old ship church, where you can kind of ring, you know, you can sit there and you can ring the bell and you want to be careful because it's old, these are change bells, and the way you ring them is a little bit different. So when you're ringing them, you have to bring them up to an upside down position, and they balance up there. And so you're learning bell control, and you have to maintain control of your rope, and you have to time it so that you can ring in concert with other people. So you're either ringing faster or slower so that you can ring either ahead or behind of the people that, you know, as you're going through your progressions. So It's a lot harder than you'd think, and that's how Dan came back to us. We're really, really fortunate. After some years of absence, he agreed to come back and train a whole new band of ringers, and we've been really, really lucky because it's hard to learn. I think it took me probably 6 months before I could really have good control of my ropes, and like I said, I'm still learning the progressions because it's super hard, even with a good teacher. So that's sort of a little update of the bell. We've had a project with the bell tower already where it's been, there was work done to stabilize the tower, and now we're requesting, really, 10 bells are in the tower that swing. They all need some work, but we're requesting the 2 most difficult bells, number 6 and number 8, and even for experienced ringers, and we have ringers here in the audience who've been ringing for decades, who were ringing number 8 for years and years and years, and now it can no longer be easily rung. Some of them are really, really challenging. So we wanted to start with that, and that was our proposal. So I brought my little bell ringing book. This is from 1982. From Sherborne, England, and on the first page of the book on how to become a bell ringer, it says, can you read any inscriptions? It's like, look at the bells. Do you see any inscriptions? What do they look like? What size are they? And it says bells are often very old, but generally they've been rehung on ball bearings. And I just wanted to point that out, that's how standard that is, and that's what we're asking for this, is that we're going from an old system to putting them on ball bearings so that they can be rung easily and so they can continue to be rung as a living memorial. So, and Dan's good with the technical pieces.
And actually what we're looking for is to kind of restore their, the ability to bring them to the same level that they were hung in originally in 1912. What's happened is that, well, actually, why don't I tell you what would be replaced in this process? So you can see the wheel. There would be new wheels made. There's a headstock you can see on the left-hand drawing. That's a cast iron piece of cast iron, and the bearings you can see on either side stick out of the headstock. Those would all be new, and there's a little block that the bearings kind of sit in, and that is those would be the new bearings that would replace the old bearings. And I think stays and sliders would also be replaced, and new clappers. The clappers, they do wear out, so they recommend replacing clappers. So if we go to the next slide, I think you can see, so some of the issues are uneven wear. Basically, the bearings are basically a rod in a cup, and it swings back and forth. And they've been doing that for 105 years, and that kind of wears out. So I think if you can, on the next slide, I think there's some pictures that there's a loop there right in the middle of it. That is a bearing cover. It's supposed to, it's actually broken, but it's on a hinge, and it's supposed to lift up, and you can put oil or grease into those bearings. And that's number 8, which is one of the bells we want to refurbish. And that actually shows the inside of the bearing, and it's just kind of crusty, and the cover is crusty, but the bottom you can see there's some of the metal is very shiny just because it's been swinging up there for 100 years. So that's the component that will make restore these bells to the way they were able to ring in 1912. It will be they used the best technology that they had at the time, and this is the best technology now. The clappers, as you can see, it's pretty well pitted. These are exposed to the elements, so they actually do need to be refurbished. They actually have a mechanism all the way up at the top of the bell, inside the bell, and all that would be replaced as well because there is wear on that. This is an example of how they would look when they were redone. You can see where the headstock and where the bearings kind of come out into the bearing cases that are mounted on the frame. And these bells will be significantly easier to ring, and therefore making a better sound. And so, yeah, so just in a recap, that we'll have new wheels, sliders, stays, clappers. I'm not certain as we're going to get new ropes, but they might be, and there are some pulleys involved as well. But it will restore the bells back to their original condition, or at least the way they sound, the way they sounded in 1912. So, I think have we reached the end? Yes, I think we have. So you have the project costs, and the 26,000 would cover 2 bells. And we would love to rehang all of the bells because they are set, and it would be kind of like repairing your piano, but just doing the black keys. So
Give us a sense of that time. The others can last another 5 years, 10 years, or you just don't know?
we don't know.
Okay.
We really don't.
But right now, if you do these two,
Yes.
you're copacetic for a while.
Those 2 bells are copacetic for a while. It does not address the entire ring, that's the problem. But we wanted to try out 2 bells to see how well they do, but also we knew funds were limited, so I think that's why we went for 2 bells. I mean, you may be able to address that more than I can.
Well, and we also had been working with Whitechapel, which was in business for over 500 years, and then that changed. So we've found a new foundry in Virginia, Sunderland, and this would also be a new relationship with them. So I think 2 bells would be a nice way to make sure that that works well.
I think you're asking under historic preservation, not recreational, though this is recreation for you all. And I think it's fascinating that Whitechapel in London is also the place that the Liberty Bell was made,
Yes.
and Big Ben.
Yes.
And while that's under another name now, that's where our bells were made, and they're imitations, they're copies of bells found in Hingham, England, and some of the towns
And around
us.
that, yeah.
So you're
they're
under historic.
replicas. Yeah, they're beautiful. And you can see when you go into the tower, there are posters that have been framed on the wall that describe each of the bells, the bells that they're replicas of, what their inscriptions are, so you can get a little bit of history right in the front foyer.
They're actually replicas of the bells that they would have heard, the settlers would have heard before they left.
Before they
So
left
all
home,
of the
came
inscriptions
here.
on the replica inscriptions all are pre-1630. So some of them are 1420. It's really magnificent. And they're mostly in Latin. But I think it's a wonderful connection to the early settlers. I can imagine that they probably wanted, when they were living here and freezing and building a new life, thinking the sound of the bells would have been comforting. And these are the bells that were in their area
A few
before they
hundred
left.
years to get them up there, but...
But we got it done. We got it done. Yes, absolutely.
I have a question. You mentioned you have 2 bells that are for proposal, but you took the time to put 3 bells in your pictures showing the deterioration at the clapper for bell number 1. So I guess I'm wondering if you bothered to make the picture for bell number 1, why you didn't ask for at least 3 bells.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly, to me, if I'm ringing a bell, the biggest thing that rings the bell is the clapper. To me, if your clapper doesn't work, you don't have a bell. So
That's a good point.
if you're asking us for bells and you show us 3 that really are in trouble, why aren't we being asked for 3?
Well, honestly, we have engaged my 2 children as our assistant steeple keepers. They go up into the tower because it's like climbing a jungle gym, and they oil the bells. They've done that for the past 10 years, and we sent Emma up with a camera to take some pictures of that, and I think that was just an illustration that we had. To Dan's point, all of the bells need care, and in order to, I heard what you said, that it's recreational, but it's a bell tower where you can't ring the bells isn't really a bell tower. Like it's
Right.
right, that would just be the saddest thing in the world.
So can you give us the scope? We're a committee, are there other funds? I mean, if this committee funds 2 bells, are you have the ability to fund other bells at another time? Are you coming back 5 years for 2 bells every year? Are you coming back next year for 8 bells? What's the plan? I mean, you must have a plan, because you used the example, piano. Why would you do the black keys if you're not doing the white keys? It doesn't make sense to me at all.
Well, I think our circumstances, again, with the foundry has changed, and I think the 2 bells is a good way to start. I think if we were able to get funding for the rest of the bells next year, then that would be lovely. You know, the scope is really the 10 bells.
So are we testing out the foundry, just so that I understand? We're trying 2 bells to see what happens. I don't understand.
Either way, I think we started with the approach with 2 bells because basically for financial reasons. Also, we kind of got blindsided when Whitechapel went out of business.
And they're the hardest bells.
And they are the hardest bells to ring. So it was part of it was that we were also afraid we didn't quite know how long the bells would be out. So we were concerned that the bells would, if we rehung all the bells would be silent for a long period of time. It turns out that that is not the case. Okay. Mr. Sunderland has given an estimate to do all 10, and it's actually in a remarkably short period of time, not that much longer than the time it would take to do 2 bells. So it was kind of an iterative process, and I think we had already asked for 2 by the time we realized that we could get 10 done in the same period of time. And to address your question about that particular bell,
yes.
It's really actually kind of interesting. That bell is actually raised. There are 2 bells that are higher than the other bells, so you can actually just see the clapper without getting on the floor.
Okay.
So that's why she took that picture.
Dan, you had said something when CPC made the site visit, which I think would be important to reiterate to the people in this room and to tell to the people at home, which if this gets kicked up to being a warrant, they'll want to know when they go to town meeting. You talked about ringing all the bells, but these 2 in particular is like riding a bike with a flat tire.
Yes.
You can do it, but it's really hard. So I think you should explain that.
That's absolutely. I kind of explained how the bearings are right now. They're kind of like a bar that in a cup that rolls back and forth, and that is pitted, that's corroded. So it's just harder to swing the bell. And so, yeah, the analogy of riding a bike with a slightly flat tire or a very flat tire, you can do both, but it takes an awful lot of effort. And the problem with that is we can still do it, but our ability to train new bell ringers to do it is going to be difficult because we have kind of 2 bells that we train on, 3 and 4, and they're okay. But you can't train somebody on 6 or 8. You just couldn't do it. It's just way too much exertion. I'm pretty fit, and I've been ringing bells for 46 years, and they asked me to raise number 8 when the British group came a couple weeks ago, and I was exhausted. It was amazing. It was amazing. Not what I remembered.
I'm sorry.
Not what I used to be
I just
either.
wanted to ask one more question because I'm not sure you asked. Are there any opportunities for other funds for bell towers? And has that been something that you've looked into?
I haven't really.
And I would assume
mean,
there must be some historical component to 100-year-old bells.
Yeah.
I don't know of other funding right now. That we could, I'm not saying there isn't funding.
No, I
available.
didn't know if you'd looked into it and it doesn't go under any category or something, so I just am asking.
We don't have plans currently to pursue other funding.
Okay, thank you.
If you don't get all the money, what do you do? If you get half the money, would you do 1 bell? Or could you get money somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, if whatever money we got, we would address the bells that are most difficult to ring. You know, we have an interest in being able to ring all 10 bells. Even like Dan was saying, for experienced ringers, it's very, very challenging. But we want to be able to ring all 10. That would be, again, very, very sad.
Right. I'm going back to the piano thing because, you can play a piano that's kind of stiff and sticky, but if only some of the keys work, it's very difficult to do an entire tune on it. So it's the same thing with the bells. It would be nice to have 2 refurbished bells, but to fully appreciate and realize the potential of the instrument, you really do need to do all 10. And all 10, I think, is that what, about 100,000 additional would be to do all 10.
So we're going to get to know each other very well.
I think we will, yes. Absolutely.
Are the bells themselves, do they have an indefinite lifespan, or what's how?
Bells are in remarkable shape. Bells have been around in England. I mean, these bells like this, change ringing bells, are very common in England. There's 5,000 or 6,000 bell towers in England. There's probably about 30 in North America. And some of those in England, I mean, I think that the bells that these are copies of are still ringing. in and around Hingham, Norfolk. So the bells themselves are pretty sturdy. What we would do, one thing we didn't say is that we would quarter turn them. So when you reinstall them on the new headstocks, they will be just turned a quarter. That's a standard procedure, so that when the clappers hit the side of the bell, it's not in the same place as it was for 100 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Change the sound of the bell?
It doesn't, actually. It's, I asked that question too when I've spoken with bell hangers, and they said, no, it's just kind of keeps, as you said, changing the tires, rotating your tires. But you only have to do it every 100 years.
With the ball bearings, it sounds as though they'll be easier to ring than they ever were.
Absolutely, yes.
It's quite a step ahead.
It is.
Little people can ring in the future.
Almost.
I can go.
Right.
Absolutely. Bells in actually the bell towers in Boston, the Old North Church and Church of the Advent were both rehung on ball bearings. And I rang them before and after, and it's night and day.
It'll be great to see that done uniformly.
Yes. Yes, and the quality of the sound, the syncopation will be much better because you're not, right.
And Martha, the bells are town-owned, right? We, the people, own them.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were actually raised by public subscription, so it was, they are very much in the public domain. It was kind
Thank you
of,
for your presentation. Would you like to get a little PR shot in before you leave? On television? When are you open? No, I mean, tell us when we can...
we ring bells on,
on
every Saturday morning at 9:30.
There you go.
And
Yeah.
if you are able-bodied and want to do it, we will be very happy to show you how.
And I will say too, my husband was just a bystander for a long, long time. And when Dan was brought back into the tower, I said, this is a chance of a lifetime to be taught by Dan. He does a great job. So if you want to learn to ring bells, now is just a great time while we have Dan.
The Saturday is a little different.
Oh, yes, we will.
You've got a Shaughnessy crane coming in as part of the project, and the estimate is, can you tell me how you're going to remove the bells through the windows?
The bells are actually going to stay in the tower.
Okay.
That was one of the stipulations that we had. We didn't want the bells transported anywhere.
Okay.
So they can actually hoist them up on the beams that are there.
Okay.
And take the fittings off, and they'll lower them into the pit that the bells swing in. And then they will lower the wheels and the headstocks up down the side of the building, and then the new ones will go up. So the bells aren't going to leave the building.
And you've had someone come in and take those measurements, make sure that...
They have taken measurements to give us the estimate, and then when we give them the go-ahead, when we have notice to proceed, they will come back and do detailed measurements. So
They're just up there, open to the elements.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I did the project many years ago, so
wow.
I work with Mike, and I know that there's also, that we reinstall the access panels in the floors that were intended to lower the bells through.
If
But
we
I haven't
need-
been in the belfry myself. I'm just trying to picture the boom of a crane fitting anywhere inside that location. But if you're telling me someone's done that and it's taken the measurements and it's going to fit, that's good enough for me. I would also just add that if that is the case, and hopefully that is, that it's being a public building and basically it's subject to some things, including prevailing wages and other public bidding requirements. I would recommend that the committee and yourself consider that, if that's the bottom, if that's the quote that you receive, that we carry a contingency within that price to make sure that you actually have enough to do the actual job when it comes time to do it. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, so Mike was pointing out, the North American Guild of Change Ringers is a club for bell ringers, and they are coming to Hingham on Saturday morning at 9:30 to ring our bells, yes. So you'll have a chance to hear all different, hear bell ringers that aren't just us trying to learn how. So it could be interesting.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. We're now going to hear from the Hingham Cemetery Landscaping Group. Hi, Ruth.
Hi there, everybody. My presentation is going to feel very ordinary after listening to about change bills. My name is Ruth Davis, and I live at 702 Tuckers Lane in Hingham, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the Hingham Cemetery. The cemetery was incorporated in 1838 as a nonprofit under Massachusetts corporate laws. We receive no funding from the town of Hingham for the ordinary annual operation of our cemetery. The cemetery consists of 13.3 acres of land, which is hilly and terraced. It is the oldest burial ground in the town of Hingham, and we are on the National Registry of Historic Places, so we have quite a history here in Hingham. In 2015, after the successful completion of the restoration of the Ames Chapel, the Board of Directors then began to address issues around the grounds, issues of erosion, issues of the ancient trees, which were 150 to 200 years old, reaching the end of their lifespan, and issues of irrigation. Many of our larger specimen trees are beginning to reach the end of their natural lifespan, and for the last 2 years we've been working with an arborist who has done a great deal of work, and we've spent, at this point, it's now $20,000 on trees, removing dead trees, pruning up dead wood in trees, and guying up the center of trees in order to get more lifespan, a couple of more decades on some of the really old historic trees that we've got. And last fall, a subcommittee of the Board of Directors began working to deal with issues around the restoration and preservation of some of the landscaping in areas of the cemetery. And we specifically focused on two areas, the Water Street entrance and the entrance at the bell tower between Old Ship and the bell tower. And that is the oldest entrance in the cemetery. And we began to deal with Sean Papich. We hired Mr. Papich, who developed a design for both areas, and the Board of Directors reviewed this in February and accepted his design. At that point, we went out and sought bids from 3 vendors. We worked with Brightview Landscaping, Skyview Landscapes LLC, and W. Lee Mann & Son Incorporated. And we picked Lee Mann of Holbrook as our contractor to begin to do work. In the fall, this immediate past fall, we began the work in the Water Street area. And that work started at the end of September and has been completed, and the cemetery fully funded the work that was done. Now, the 2 phases, Water Street and the proposal that we have before you tonight, have a total cost of $115,351. We have paid out of the cemetery resources $71,622 of that amount, total amount. Our remaining project for the bell tower restoration of plantings and materials will be costing $43,729, and our application this evening is for a CPC grant of $40,000. We figure we have, in good faith, spent, approximately 2/3 of the total cost of these phases, and we're asking for assistance. This is our second application for CPC funding of a project. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware of the work that we did with the Ames Chapel, which came in on budget and almost on time and was very, very successful and has been utilized in the way we represented to the town it would be utilized. It's being rented by families for weddings, for receptions after burials, for office parties, for family gatherings. It is doing what we had hoped it would be doing, and we're enormously pleased. It is a lovely, sweet little building, which you all helped to make happen. The entrance area that we're talking about up at the bell tower is the oldest portion, and the proposed work goes on the slope and in the embankment behind Old Ship. It bends around and goes towards the entrance between the bell tower and Old Ship. And we've asked Mr. Papich to come here this evening to show you some of the drawings, and we will have some pass-outs to for the visualization of what we anticipate the completed project will look like. The top of the embankment has the oldest graves in the town, and they date from approximately the late 1600s to the early 1700s. And this restoration work, which will go, this is the bump out, which is the old ship's new toilet area. We'll go, there's an unused gate over here, which is sort of pretty well blocked off. The project goes in this area, from the edge of the lower area, and this is the, all the way back to the entrance of the gate, the bell tower gate. We believe our project qualifies for community preservation funds because it is historic preservation. We are in an iconic triad. We have Old Ship, we have the bell tower, and we have the cemetery. And we believe that this is historic preservation under your guidelines and under the online manual that you have for the CPC committee. It is also open spaces. The people who, not only visitors to Hingham, but also residents in the entire area, use the cemetery as a walking location. And we have walkers that go through there from dawn to dusk, 7 days a week, because the cemetery is never closed. It's always open. At this time, we have spent approximately a year, because we began doing this last November, December. So we feel we have a well-thought-out plan. We feel we have done our due diligence on this. We've gotten good quotes from, we had 3 excellent companies to choose from, and we are hoping that you will consider our project. And that is my ordinary presentation after listening to Whitechapel Belcher Foundry and
Thank you.
the rather wonderful presentation beforehand. But this is ours, and we think we have merit in what we have worked on and developed and are presenting before you this evening.
Thank you, Ruth, and we really appreciated your site visit. That was so helpful to see the area. That's great. Is there anything about, I should ask Sean this, about the plantings that would reflect sort of historic plantings? I don't even know what I'm talking about, but is there anything, I mean, when you stand there and look around, there's nothing that looks very formally planted. It's a tree over here and somebody stuck a shrub there, and it's, you know, and then this is a well-thought-out design, beautifully done. Is there anything else, either within the cemetery or nearby, that kind of reflects this a little bit? Would this stand out as being one area that's really been landscaped in an otherwise sort of natural setting?
I would say that it would relate back to the new entry, the old entry that we did on Water Street that we did more recently. And really the mission there was to do something very subdued, still address the landscape, because it was really in a state of disrepair, much like this entry at the bell tower. There are a lot of challenges. In terms of the plant material, we were intending to do some large massing of, I would say, medium to large size shrubs, nothing overly fussy, something that is very, very hardy, a mix of evergreens and deciduous plant material. In terms of historical nature, certainly old. Would they have been planted in the 1600s? I don't know if anything would have been planted in the 1600s. So we think of Olmsted and that era, and maybe some that came before him. And so certainly, these are a lot of the same plants that he would probably use. Certainly be cultivars that weren't used or available to Frederick Olmsted or some of the other historic landscape architects or garden designers of the time. What we did do was try to address some of the grade issues that we're having. So I think what you noticed on site, I think there was some discussion about grades, potential walls. What we have challenges with, as you can see on some of these pictures, and if you're at the site, very, very challenging slopes. On one of those pages you would have gotten, probably your last one there, we showed some sections. And big challenges there are existing grading on, pictured along the lane that goes along the bell tower. That's a very challenging grade. What may or may not have been fully understandable on a site visit is we're intending to fill that grade, so we're going to be bringing in fill and loam to fill that grade and slope it down to the base of those bollards that are there. So instead of being a one-to-one slope, one-to-one slope is basically 45-degree slope. That's not very manageable.
Do this to it.
Correct. We were going to do that. Is it perfect? Probably not, but certainly in
Gonna make a big-
substantially better condition there. And what you had there was a lot of erosion. You had a little bit of mixed lawn and a little bit of mixed weed and invasive volunteer species. My sense is as some of those trees started to grow, they shaded out any lawn that would have been there in the past. A lot of those grave sites are right at the top of the hill. It's shocking when you go up there and see some of those grave sites. And so that was actually as much of a mission as anything else. As much as it was to beautify this entry, that was one of the more pragmatic sort of goals with a plan like this. The other area of major concern, you can jump in with a question anytime.
Oh, and I don't mean to sound facetious, but I really feel like the people in those graves are hanging on by fingernails. You know, it's so eroded, and I guess my question is, the erosion there is so obvious. You sort of wonder, so what caused that? And I think one of the things that I heard on the site visit is, I mean, clearly adding fill and grading that, but what caused the, I mean, to such a, somebody put some grave sites there with people being buried and hanging on by their fingernails now, so there must have been at some point.
There probably was more land there before, and it gradually eroded
why
away.
there? And so I guess the question was it necessarily the plantings around it that caused the erosion?
I don't necessarily think so. It could have been water. Erosion certainly occurs with the water. That slope probably was eaten away over a period of time. Just like
Maybe
the other
it's the
erosion.
building around other places?
Yeah, sandy soils, and that's and then once you had the shade, shading out a lot of that lawn area that was holding the slope, that's probably where it really happened. But those are not slopes you typically design for. Some engineers will design for them when they know they're going to be using erosion control, or they're using riprap of some kind.
So the question is, the kind of plantings that you're proposing will increase the, lessen the opportunity of more erosion there. So
that would be accurate, but it's also the fact that we're going to decrease the slope. So we're actually going to make the slope more palatable.
So instead of a wall, plantings are a better choice than, I guess.
A wall would have been, in my opinion, cost prohibitive if we were doing an extensive wall.
Okay.
Would have been another 3 times the price of the project, and that wouldn't even include the plants.
And not,
So I think,
not attractive.
Yeah, so in our condition, when we look at something like that and we have to think about potential budgets, we have to say, okay, well, what would be the best thing? Well, maybe a wall, but what would that cost be? And then in this case, we would say, well, if that's not a condition, that slope has been okay for I don't know how many years, a little while before I've been here. And so I think the only reason it's got shaded out, it certainly wouldn't be the way you'd ever design something like that in. So that's been sustaining in a difficult way. We intend to make it sustainable in a way that's obviously going to function without any problem whatsoever. The slope that we have where the very large juniper is, which is currently...
Right. Along the other side.
Yeah, currently in here, what you see, very, very large juniper. That was encroaching upon the old church property and became a problem because of it. And that was part of, also it's starting to thin out. It's getting so old, it's starting to thin out. It's starting to become a challenge there. Also, another grave site is basically in that juniper. So that's a real challenging area. That's a real challenging area, right? It's right in there.
There's actually a grave down in there?
Yeah, there's a headstone right there, and so they're going to have to work very carefully. That's a very, very challenging grade also, and you can kind of see it on one of the graphs that we showed, a section that we drew there. For that area, another challenge area, we agreed to put in some juniper there, primarily because we know it does well there. It's been doing well there for a long time. We wouldn't use a very large juniper. We'd use low ground-covered juniper, in addition to some other evergreen shrubs and deciduous shrubs. It's more a softer weave of plants, kind of bigger brush strokes is what we're going to be doing there. We would also intend to use some erosion control fabric, coconut fiber, coir, coir fiber logs, or not so much the logs as the mats. So that was our intention. We think that that's going to help out tremendously.
Sean, where you've taken the land and made it less sloped,
Correct.
are you absolutely confident that the cemetery owns the land over that far? We're not into town property?
I believe that the cemetery does. I'd have to double check on any of the other maps, but my understanding is we have. We were working off of the tax maps that we were doing. We developed our own base map. There was no very good, there wasn't a very good survey for this property. It goes right to the edge of the bollards.
Looked to me like some of those graves at the top of the hill might be at the bottom of the hill pretty soon.
It sure looks it, doesn't it? Yeah, sure.
Hanging on.
It's amazing, yeah.
But I'm a little disoriented by that drawing up there. Where is that really eroded slope on that drawing? Is it?
Beyond it.
It's all back inside.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's
I
all
see.
deep into it, so if you look at
It's,
Yeah, in here.
he's pulling it this way instead
see,
of this
I
way,
see.
this way. He's pulling this bottom out.
Yep, yep,
Yeah,
okay.
it's night and day, isn't it?
Yep.
It's just completely different.
Given that we believe a wall to be prohibitive in terms of cost, we felt that managing the slope, adding fill and loam in that area, providing the erosion control netting.
So no one got a bid on that? You didn't call in a mason to see what it would cost to pull that existing wall back another 40 feet or something?
Well, we got a number to do the full wall. I think there was some discussion at the site visit of maybe doing a wall that wraps all the way
Picking
that
up what's
distance.
there.
Picking up what's there, lifting that in the area of the bottom of this. So lifting that by a handful of feet, having that raised, and then returning and wrapping a wall around. Adding more height to this wall, and then returning and wrapping it back. We got a number, if somebody was to do that with large granite pieces, have to set those with an operator, was close to $100,000.
It's not something you lift the rock up and put it in, it's a...
That was the type of stone they would try to use to
To
match some of
match.
that stone that's on the corner. Also, we have to be very, very careful using anything around the back of Old Ship Church. I could just see somebody working there and
The crane.
dropping something through the back of Old Ship Church.
What if you didn't touch that part and just picked up where it stops and continued on another 30 feet or whatever you'd need to do?
Right in here?
You keep going, oh, because there's something in there. What is that?
It's a vault. It's a vault, utility vault.
It would have to be after.
So you couldn't just go in front of that and keep going
We
straight
wouldn't,
across?
yeah, we'd have to go behind and above it. Extrapolating some of the numbers that were used by the stonemason, the contractor who gave us the numbers. I mean, you would probably be, if we were doing a section to carry this distance,
Yeah.
might be $50,000 maybe, just by using the math that he used.
But it's permanent.
Is that again, permanent?
It's permanent.
It is.
But you'd still have to do the fill, so it would be 50,
Still have to do
it would be
fill,
almost
and
50
still
on
have to
top
do-
of,
Still have to do the plantings.
Right.
Still would do. So, that's what we were, thought of it for the scope that we were working on at the time to be cost prohibitive. Do you have anything to add on this, Ruth or Jay? What we were- They also had multiple conversations with several contractors, actually even prior to us being involved in the project.
I have to ask a question, but I have no idea what to call it or what to say.
That's okay.
So you're like this right now, basically. It's pretty steep.
On this, yeah, in this
Yeah.
location right there.
How do you measure that? Is that do you measure from here to here and say it's a...
Degrees?
What kind of slope is it? What-
We typically use a ratio, so we'll refer to it as a 1-to-1 slope, so it's 1 horizontal foot.
Going out
and
as
1
far as it
vertical
is,
foot.
okay.
Exactly.
So,
That's
and you want to
45.
go like this, so then what will it be if it's all
So
done
we're
that way?
going a little closer to 2.5, 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. Down here, I think we can get 3-to-1 in a few areas.
Okay.
That's more manageable. 2-to-1 is manageable if we want to use the erosion control fabric, the netting, which is what we
It's a
would
good
do.
idea, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and some of those are actually used, some of the coir mats, or the netting is applicable for one-to-one.
Cut a hole in it, you stick the tree in, and it covers everything basically, and,
Contractors don't love using it because it's tough to cut through.
oh,
If it's done right. But these coconut fiber is, those will sustain about 4 to 6 years. More
covered
than
with
the
mulch
typical
or
jute
something
mesh.
till it grows in, and,
That's correct. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Do you have any other questions?
Thank you.
The slope behind the church doesn't change.
No.
Right.
You're talking about, up into here or right here? No, you're going to be leaving all that slope the same, essentially. It's really in this area.
Yeah.
You're changing the slope.
since we asked everyone else, Ruth, if we don't get to do, if we can't fund you this year, would you just wait a year? Would you?
I would have, that's not my decision to make tonight. We would have to go back to we would have to go back to our board and decide whether they wanted to put it off. Alternatively, we would look for other sources of funding. When we started to talk to vendors, when we knew we wanted to do this, we did not get our financial information and cost estimates from the vendors in time to make the fall application for Greenbush funds. That date closed, I think, in August, and we didn't have our information at that time. Since we do have it, we might very well look towards a spring application.
You're right in the Greenbush area. That sounds like a good idea.
So that is our fallback position, but we are obviously waiting for the decision from the CPC committee before we take the next step.
So you have to make it through this winter one way or the other.
Well, we're going to make it through this winter. We're not looking to start this work until either late spring or early summer next year.
Yeah. Yes.
It's too late to
Sure. Introduce yourself.
I'm Jay Sadlon, 33 South Pleasant Street in Hingham, and I'm currently president of the Board of Directors of the Hingham Cemetery. And I know this body is very concerned about value to the town of Hingham. And if you are familiar with the daily goings-on of the cemetery, you know that hundreds of people come through and walk through that area. Right now, this particular area is in pretty bad condition. Some of the worst area right in here has not suffered from erosion because of the plantings, but the plantings are no longer of use. They're overgrown. If they were trimmed back, cut back, they would die and they'd be unsightly. But the value to the town of Hingham is this incredible triad of the bell tower, the circa 1672 Hingham Cemetery, and the 1681 Old Ship Church. And the more people come into the town, the more they will be attracted to this particular area of town, which is important to Hingham. So I think it's a very worthwhile project for not only the cemetery, but for the town. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Are we all asleep or run out of questions? More comments?
Before you go, it's important that in terms of the allowable uses for CPA, I know Carol talked to you earlier today, it's important that this project focus on doing two things. One is either identifying that this is some sort of replica of a former historical landscaping plan, which I don't know that it is or it isn't, but I'm going to leave all these responses blank just for now. And then two, that the landscape itself is going to be used to preserve the historic elements of the cemetery, i.e., we don't want the headstones or rolling into the off the hill, if you will. So just as a landscape project alone, a beautification project, it doesn't.
Correct.
We've confirmed that today. So just bear that in mind as we move forward.
That's where the conversation about the stone wall came up. Is we can fund stone walls all day long. Plantings are difficult, and as you say, what was here in 1600, who knows?
Right, that's correct.
Weeds.
Erosion control, though, is a pretty important piece of it. And so you can decide to do that in a couple different ways. One of those can be stone walls or combination of stone walls, boulders, grading. In this case, grading and planting was a selected consideration because of costs.
Yeah. It's wonderful. It's not a photo, is it? No, it's artwork.
Yeah, it's
whoever came up with that. Yeah. You might want to take a picture that shows where we stood and looked up at this soil falling down and gravestones right at the very top.
Yeah, right.
Right at the top.
Yeah, I mean, we probably have them in some of these photos also.
Yeah.
Right in here, right at the edges.
That's a good idea.
Also right at the
And
end.
such sandy soil. I mean, you can see how quickly
Challenging.
that could go in a storm.
I just understood something. We said we can't fund plantings?
How much is that,
We
just
can't
that
fund
section?
Yes, we can under some circumstances.
Not the total project with
Yeah.
the Water Street and all that, but this one particular section.
This section here, the
Yes.
bell tower,
Yeah.
the cost to do this is $43,729.
Okay.
And we've already paid the $71,000 down on the Water Street for that work.
Okay, so if we're just looking at this one particular
We're just
piece
looking at the
as
bell
a-
tower, this area here, that's the only part that we're talking
And
about.
it's 43,000?
Correct.
You do have an endowment, but we understand that that's the source of income for maintaining all these 13-some acres that you...
That's a good question, and this came up when we were applying for CPC funds when we were doing the Ames Chapel, and it's certainly, reasonable. The market value right now of our endowment fund is $1,968,000 plus a little. And we have three sources of income from the cemetery. The cemetery is still an active cemetery. You can buy lots up there. We have an inventory of lots that can be sold. Eventually, it will be gone. 13.13 acres is always going to be 13.13 acres. When our inventory of lots available for sale is gone, sold, and the cemetery becomes full, then that endowment fund is going to have to work even harder than it does now and carry the bulk of the costs, or the alternative is we start asking the town to fund, at some point in the future, the annual maintenance costs. And right now, we are not receiving any funds from the town in terms of annual operating. So as a director, and all of the directors have a fiduciary responsibility, that when we draw from the endowment fund, we have to be very careful that it does not go below a certain level. And a prior treasurer advised us years ago that we should not go below 1.8 without negatively impacting the possible future operation of the cemetery. And that's our sort of raison of operation, of how we consider the uses of the endowment fund. We have to be very careful. We went into the endowment fund very heavily to do the Ames Chapel, and the reason it has come back is because the stock market is going great right now.
And you've been able to use the building, which is wonderful.
And the building is done. So we've been responsible custodians of both our grants that we've received and also of the resources that are entrusted to us.
And Sean, I have to...
One other thing to note about what you're also wanting to do for the rest of the cemetery you hadn't brought up to this point is, and it's something we're going to get to over a period of years, is all of the, if you look up from South Street or North Street and you see all of that grade and all that terracing, I wouldn't, 50 to 70% of that is eroding away very strongly. And so we've got a mission, it's not necessarily addressed here on this, but to address every one of those areas with some sort of treatment that can function. And they all might be a little bit differently just because of the microclimates that they're in, I would
We
say.
have years of erosion work ahead of us.
Sorry, I didn't want to jump.
That's
That's
all
what
right.
I want
That's
you
all
to
right.
understand.
And then my
This is
last
a-
question
this
is
is
for you,
another
Sean.
phase.
Your work is so well known around town as being beautiful. Is there anything here that doesn't have to be here and would give it more of a loose country look and less of an organized...
Good question.
I know, that's a horrible thing to ask.
No, it's
Architect. Could you
any
give us
question's
some
a good
thought?
one. No, everything's a good one, because every every project is not really, it's always an expression of what the site is
Yeah.
and what the client, in this case, the Hingham Cemetery Corporation, is trying to do, and I think it's very rarely anything having to do with me, really. It's just kind of a mechanism through
What
which it
they're
all goes
asking
through.
for, yeah.
So the mission here, I would say, we talked about it being subdued and elegant in every case, not too many bright colors, not too many showy plants, things that would almost be,
White and, yeah.
hate to say, almost like a very subtle Monet painting, kind of a brushstrokes. We like to call it a little bit more, it's still an American garden. It's still distinctly American, but still subtle. So I think the only way I would answer that question might be if you maybe thinned out the variety of plants, although I think this is still fairly,
Yeah. But if your
So,
main purpose is erosion,
yeah.
if this were in my backyard, I'd accept it exactly the way it is, don't change a thing. But I'm thinking if your goal is erosion and we
Well,
can
you'd probably
save
do-
a little bit on money,
You might do seed mixes and, native, but I'm from Iowa, so you guys might say I'm bringing the prairie into here, so I might get into trouble for that. But you might do native seed mixes, but then you might have a tendency with maintenance of something like that. Challenge on that is how do you maintain a meadow without it feeling like it's a weed
I'm
bed?
thinking
It's
more in
always a
terms of
challenge.
just less plants. Just take every third one
Less
out or
quantity?
something, yeah.
Then erosion control will be a little bit,
This is what you need to do to hold it.
feels like it, yeah. It's not too heavily planted in terms of spacing. Spacing is relatively average. We didn't tighten them up at all for the erosion control per se.
There are no ground covers that would help, that would have enough roots to help hold this up?
Yeah, we're planning on anything to, we would also plan on the erosion control netting to help us out in the short term. Anything being planted in the short term would be helped out by that. The juniper will thicken up in the real tight areas. We could introduce a few ground covers, but then you get into a different layer of management. So that sort of
Yeah.
plant management, when you
This is
start doing,
low management, isn't it?
yeah, it is.
But will there be some bare earth that'll be always subject to erosion?
We are going to have it certainly mulch beds,
Okay.
mulching all the plant beds, certainly
protected
mulching
right
them
there.
heavily, but they'll require maintenance. Yeah, nothing is no maintenance. Even meadows and prairies require maintenance.
I think we did it. Thank you very much. Nice presentation. Thank you.
After hearing your name all these years, it's great to see this.
Now you know who he is. Okay, thank you, committee. We're on again tomorrow night. If you enjoyed this, come back and see us again. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor? I think you meant to say yes. Thank you all.